At the height of the pandemic, streaming services were hailed for keeping people united in their isolation with entertainment that went beyond borders. Indeed, for consumers even now, their appeal is universal. But what have been the implications of streaming services on related industries? How are they affecting content creation? How are they affecting movie theaters? And how are they affecting television? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Streaming services have ushered in a new era of entertainment consumption, creation and distribution. And for more on their broader implications, I have film critic Conran live on the line. Pierce, it's good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Sunny. Thank you very much for having me.
I also have Doctor Christian Stiegler at Guiding Light Center for Ethics and Sustainable Technologies with us virtually. Dr. Stiegler, it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right, Pierce, let's start with you then. Let's start off with a few words on a recent conflict between a local drama production team here and a local streaming service. I understand the director of the drama, Anna, accused Coupang Play of unilateral changes to the original production. Could you tell us more?
Sure. So Anna is a 6-episode drama starring Bae Suji, a big star here in Korea, which debuted earlier this summer on Coupang Play, which is the sort of fledgling streaming service of the Korean e-commerce giant Coupang, essentially the Korean Amazon. Except the show was supposed to be 8 episodes. And so director Lee Joo-young who wrote and directed the show, made and edited an 8-part series, which was later re-edited down to 6 without her consent and released in that form. Several weeks after the show's release in June, she eventually went public with her grievances, very severe grievances about this. And Coupang initially claimed that their versions, the version that she had provided differed in what they had agreed on. But then the argument continued. There was sort of a big game of he said, she said unrolled. Director Lee wanted to have her name removed from the credits, as did her editor and 6 other key members of staff. And this kind of kept on going. And obviously, a lot of people were supporting Director Lee, especially the creative people in the industry. And eventually, Coupang sort of relented, and they released the director's cut on Coupang. And so they were both available. And after that, there was also a meeting, some kind of a meeting took place between Coupang and Director Lee and her lawyers, as well as members of the Directors Guild of Korea, who were kind of like, moderating this, and they were very much on Director Lee's side. And after that meeting, the next day, Director Lee's lawyers kind of said that Coupang had issued an apology and were promising to kind of make some changes going forward and to avoid this sort of problem happening again. Immediately, Coupang shoot back denying that, and so kind of continued. That's kind of where it stands. But clearly, Coupang acted in a way that is very upsetting for content creators, and there's a huge breach of trust there. We talk about streamers, and there's an image of streamers being a bit more hands-off when it comes to content creation. Whether or not that's the case, kind of a case-by-case thing. But certainly in this case, they were hands-on in a bad way, and people are nervous about that going forward.
Right. And Dr. Stiegler, generally speaking, what are your thoughts on streaming services choosing to perhaps unilaterally edit content?
Well, Sunny, as you rightly mentioned, my organization Guiding Light advocates the ethical and sustainable use of new technologies. And I would move away from the term streaming services, but move more into the term platform provider. Because Netflix or any other platform provider is not different to Spotify, Instagram, or even Tinder. Their main goal is to keep the audiences on their platforms as long as possible. They do this with algorithms that use a huge amount of data. Netflix, just as one example, knows on what devices you're watching the content on which time of the day you're watching the content. When you skip forward or rewind certain sections of content, and of course also when you leave content, browse and rate it. And having said that, there is an extreme sensitivity when it comes to content and what to show. Because if you would show as a content provider or a platform provider any sort of, let's say, offensive content, even if the director or the content creator would consider it differently, the platform provider is in the say of saying, okay, let's edit that content out because we want to not make our customers dissatisfied. We want to keep them on our platforms as long as possible to collect the data, to sell the data to third-party companies, which then do advertisement. It's no secret that Netflix and other streaming platforms do not make their money by subscriptions, but by selling data to companies who advertise in their shows and in their self-produced content.
Right. So, of course, as long as these edits are made within the boundaries of an understanding consentment, it should be okay then. Pierce, beyond conflict between content providers and content producers, there's also talk about the fate of movie theaters in light of the growing popularity of these platforms. Based on your observations, does the presence of OTT platforms look to threaten that of movie theaters, do you think?
Well, it's certainly been a major disruptor, and this was already the case before the pandemic happened. When the pandemic struck, that only accelerated, and we're in this kind of, sort of not quite, but kind of, late pandemic, not post-pandemic period, where people are no longer worried about, there are no restrictions kind of keeping people from the cinemas, but are they going? In Western markets, there seems to have been a better recovery. In Korea, it's been pretty challenging, I think. After 2 years of restrictions and a limited flow of releases, things appear to be kind of going back to normal in late spring this year. And typically, especially with the release of the film, The Roundup, the sequel to The Outlaws, that was a gigantic hit. It clearly spoke to a thirst for local content that hadn't been satisfied for pretty much years, and it became one of the most successful local films of all time with over 12 million admissions. And so then the distributors were, very confident after that, and so they started programming their big titles, which had been kind of waiting in the wings for a while for typically a very busy box office window. But what happened is a lot of these really pricey major projects completely bombed. Like, sadly, the film Alienoid, which is the first part of a two-part, most expensive film of all time in Korea, did very badly, and a few other films didn't do well. And that's continuing kind of right until now. Some films are getting some nominal audiences, but we're not. Clearly, the overall is in the red. Things are not doing very well. So the question is, why is this happening? Some people talk about the quality of the content, and some of the films that have come out maybe haven't been as great as audiences would like, but that's always the case. There's also the argument that people are just being drawn to the small screen because there's so much compelling content on streaming services. And I'm sure there's some truth to that as well. But then again, in that case as well, we have, there have been compelling drama series and whatnot for years. And that's always been a strong market. Perhaps people have been focusing on other social activities after restrictions being pulled, after years of not being able to do certain things and do social activities. Perhaps they were more focused on that. But I feel more and more that one of the main decisions is financial. We're in a pretty dark period right now with interest rates going up and inflation, and people are being squeezed on every corner, and that really includes cinemas as well. Cinemas have raised their prices 3 times in a year during the pandemic, and so people who were going to see a film for 10,000 won just over a year ago, suddenly it's 13,000 won, and that's kind of a very big factor in their decisions. So, Marvel films and all that will be okay, but the smaller films an audience takes a risk on, suddenly they won't do that anymore. So we're in a pretty difficult moment right now.
Right, and perhaps because of that reality, Dr. Stiegler, some movie makers are choosing to make simultaneous releases at movie theaters and on platform providers. Does this trend look to take permanent root, do you suppose, in the film distribution industry?
Well, I would like to underline what Pierce said. Financially, it doesn't really make much sense for most of them. You can make the numbers, right? Even the big movie theater chains, you can fit in a couple of hundred people within a movie theater, and they watch a film, and then they go out, and you can repeat this a couple of weeks. It is not comparable to the high numbers you can generate on a streaming service. So there was a recent example of Pinocchio on Disney Plus with a major star called Tom Hanks, which was a huge bomb. Probably would have never succeeded if they would have been released in cinema. So financially, it doesn't really make sense. The only reason they still do it is because they want to be eligible for awards. So when it comes to the Academy Awards, for example, in the US, so when it comes to the Emmys and others, there needs to be a certain time a film needs to be in movie theaters. So that's the reason why, people like Martin Scorsese, for example, like with The Irishman, they also release it simultaneously in the cinema and then on Netflix exclusively. But culturally, I think we see a shift. Because a couple of years ago, streaming services, or particularly Netflix, were extremely popular because of terms such as binge watching, because of urban slangs that especially youth culture used. I'll give you the hint of Netflix and chill, and you can Google that if you want that. So streaming services had an enormous hype in comparison to movie theaters, but that is changing. The pandemic is still there, but nevertheless, particularly as Piers mentioned, in Western countries, people go to the movie theaters, they're looking for the communal experience that you don't have anymore with streaming. So you want to share it with others. You want to sit in a dark room and you want to eat your popcorn and your candy. So I think that's a cultural experience that survives, and it has survived for many, many decades already. I don't see it going away. If it's a business model anymore that's the big question mark.
Right, it really is then. Piers, some streaming services, these platform providers, are choosing to buy exclusive rights to cover certain sports events. That being said, what does this growing trend mean for the future of television?
Well, I mean, as far as from a viewer's perspective, this doesn't strike me as a major shift at all, because for decades, of course, it's been perfectly normal for networks and cable channels, especially cable channels, to seek out exclusive access to sporting events. And so for me, this is just kind of the latest stage of streaming services taking over the functions previously provided by traditional TV. And, on top of that, it's interesting, we're looking at a situation where there are just so many streaming services now. And so I remember 15 years ago, people were starting to complain about TV packages getting too expensive. This is when I was living in America, and you have your typical terrestrial package, and you're adding things like Showtime and HBO and ESPN, et cetera, and it's getting very, very expensive. It's $100, and now you're kind of, we've cut the cord nominally, but we're almost spending the same amount of money now, because we need our Netflix and our Disney. Here we need Wave as well, and TVing. You can add on Apple TV Plus and Prime Video, or other local ones like Watcha and Season, and more are going to come. And they all have exclusive content libraries, and so they're all kind of fighting over these viewers. And if they all have a little piece of the puzzle of what you need to see. So for me, that's the getting exclusive rights to sports events is kind of the same thing. We had Disney was, one of their big deals. Disney was getting the exclusive rights to cricket in India, which they subsequently lost, and now they're kind of wondering, do they need to stay in India because all the money was coming from the cricket.
Right, Dr. Stiegler, for the sake of comparison, what can you tell us about the impact of platform providers, streaming services on television there in Europe?
Yeah, well, as you know, Europe is famous for its public broadcasting networks, might it be from the BBC to the RAD, ZDF in Germany, BBC in the UK, of course. So broadcasting networks that are financed by the public, either by direct taxes or by licensing fees. And those broadcasting networks obviously have a different sort of focus. They would like to reach the whole audience with objective news, but also with entertainment programs that reach different segments of a huge population. In Germany, it's over 80 million people. However, they still use ratings, so quantitative numbers, to make any sort of result at the end of their success. And they compare themselves, of course, with the ratings of streaming services or platform services such as Disney Plus or Apple Plus and others, as Piers mentioned. And that is a strong competition right now. And for them, it's a problem. So they're moving more and more into the entertainment sector, even if that wouldn't be their actual cause why they are established in the first place.
I see.
So that's the problem where we are right now.
Right. So that is something they'll have to deal with then.
All right, Dr. Stiegler, that is all the time we have for this edition, so I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Piers, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure, as always.